Hello, and welcome to another episode of PwC Tech Talks. I'm Mitra Best, lead partner for strategic innovation and technology at PwC, and also the co-lead of our Women in Tech program. In today's episode, we'll hear from 4 of our tech women who'll be discussing how to keep up with emerging and advanced technologies. At PwC, we're focused on what we call the Essential 8: AI and its subsets, moving from automating tasks into more cognitive processes like decision making, both AR and VR, and extended reality, enabling experiences that are rooted in digital and not just mimicking our physical constraints. Blockchain, and not just for cryptocurrency, but for processes that need secure tracking, like supply chain, and even making advances in cybersecurity. IoT, or Internet of Things, particularly superpowered by edge computing and 5G. And last but not least, the next generation of robotics, drones, and 3D printing, completely transforming operating models in so many businesses. What's fascinating is if you start to use these technologies in combination, you begin to unlock the next wave of innovation across many industries. The pandemic has accelerated the already dizzying speed of technology advancement and usage. As we find our ways back to our physical offices, let's not slow down. Let's invent it together using these advanced and many more emerging technologies. With that, I'm going to pass the screen and the mic to Antoinette Young, our moderator for today's panel, and hope you enjoy the show. Thank you for tuning in. Over to you, Antoinette.
Thanks, Mitra, and thank you everyone for joining us today as we discuss keeping up with emerging and advanced technologies. My name is Antoinette Young, and I'll be your moderator for today. I'm part of our Immersion tech team, where I focus on hyper-connected networks and IoT. I lead our hyper-connected networks development team in researching new technologies to build out proof of concepts to advise our clients and client service teams on applying Internet of Technologies in cross-industry solutions. I'm joined here by 3 of my fellow MTechers: Andrea, who is our MTech lead for extended reality, Ashita, who leads our MTech collaborative reality, and Alana, MTech's responsible AI lead. Andrea, I'll hand it off to you for introductions.
Yeah, I'm Andrea Maurer, and I'm in the Emerging Tech Lab as well. I've been interested in emerging tech for about the last 10 years. For me, it started when I was in college, and I switched majors to one where I had to build functional prototypes for almost everything we were learning about. So I made a robotic arm and an automated waffle making machine. And in that program, tech literacy became really important to me, and understanding how we can use technology to make things otherwise impossible attainable. So I brought that with me to PwC as part of my brand, and I've been with the firm for the last 7 years and the last 3 in the emerging tech group, where I've been focused on augmented and virtual reality technologies, and helped the firm in the last couple of years run the largest study to date on virtual reality and how it impacts learning effectiveness. And absolutely a pleasure to be here with the rest of our team.
My name is Ashita Agrawal. I am part of the Emerging Technology Group, and as Antoinette mentioned, I lead our collaborative reality practice. I have also been interested in the world of emerging technologies for many, many years, and have actually pursued an executive certificate from MIT in some of the technologies you'll be hearing about today. I like to think of myself as an experiential technologist. I'm really interested in the intersection of design and behavior, and how technology can help foster creativity and really bring us together as human beings, not just as folks that work together. I really believe that work doesn't have to be boring, and that work can be fun. And it's something that I've had the honor and pleasure of exploring as I've led our collaborative reality practice for a team in the past year. So really excited to talk to you guys about it, and happy to answer any questions.
I lead PwC's work in responsible AI globally. What that means is that I look after technologies and applications that are of AI and how AI is being used. We build AI systems, but we also think about some of the societal implications of AI and the controls that we might need in order to build AI the right way. One of the ways that we've been doing this increasingly is by leveraging gamification, so creating actual games that help us understand some of the ways AI technology and other type of emerging technology could be misused and how we might be able to control it.
So, ladies, as part of our roles within MTech, we track and explore various technologies to evaluate their business impact and commercial viability across different sectors. Within hyperconnected networks, we're currently focusing on how our clients can benefit from technologies such as 5G, edge computing, and MTech. So I believe we're all consumers of smart devices in some ways, whether it be smartphones, smart thermostats, wearable. 5G will give us the ability to connect even more devices with lower latencies and faster speeds. Edge computing and MTech will enable processing closer to the customer, making it possible for more enriched experiences. And these next-gen technologies also translate into opportunities across many different industries. The reduced latency and higher speeds can increase image quality and definition, which are some key factors that will enable healthcare industries to offer things such as telementored surgeries and remote diagnostics with the help of responsive wearables. So one of the things that I want to know is, what are some of the technologies that you guys have been keeping up with? And can you share an example of some cool work that you've done using these technologies? Andrea, I'll hand it off to you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Antoinette. When it comes to keeping up with technologies, I mean, in the Emerging Technologies Lab, my focus is on extended reality technologies. So extended reality is a term that, like an umbrella term, you can think about, that covers everything from augmented reality technology to virtual reality. And augmented reality is where we have a digital overlay on top of our view of the physical world around us. So you could think about it like wearing augmented reality glasses and seeing information displayed in front of your eye, whether that's a video feed that just looks like it's blending with the world around you, or a checklist to help you through a task you're trying to do. There's also augmented reality apps on your phone that you might use, like testing out how a product might look in your room before you buy it. So that's on one side of the spectrum. The other side, we get more and more virtual. So virtual reality is like full immersion into a digitally created environment. So if you were putting on a virtual reality headset, all of a sudden you're completely transported to a new place, whether it's standing on top of Mount Everest or being at the bottom of the ocean with a bunch of sharks. And this technology, while traditionally used for gaming, is starting to have more and more of a presence in enterprise. And so that's what I've been focused on, not just reading about, but actually prototyping and exploring how can we use these two technologies to help businesses move forward. So some of the biggest use cases in enterprise for extended reality technologies are, number one, for upskilling your workforce, so transforming our workforce to have new skills so they can actually practice situations in virtual reality, whether that's, having difficult conversations or practicing being more inclusive in the workspace, or it could be practicing a job skill. Most people are familiar with flight simulators. Pilots have been using them for years and years, but we're also currently, working with some of our clients to help them upskill new employees in a place where they can practice technical job skills. So repairing equipment, and other tasks that require specialized environments and equipment and knowledge of procedures. So training is definitely a huge use case for the extended reality technology. We also use it for collaborative, which I will pass over to Ashita to talk about because that's her focus area.
Absolutely. Thank you, Antoinette and Andrea, for teeing that up so beautifully. I think what's really important with technology is understanding the business problem that you're trying to solve. And Andrea laid out really well what these extended reality technologies are and some of the overarching themes that they accomplish. For collaborative reality, which is really just having folks collaborate in a virtual space as avatars from anywhere in the world, I think there's a couple of different levels to which it's defining the future of work. It really started with the pandemic hitting all industries and really kind of tilting the world on its head. Um, and we couldn't be in the same room together. We were stuck to our screens, and that was the only way we were able to communicate and collaborate with our colleagues. So we started exploring using VR as avatars and having this virtual sense of presence in these really amazing virtual spaces, whether it be Mars or mountains or a field somewhere that no one has ever been. But I think it goes a little bit further than that as a business problem that's being solved. So many of us are well aware of the amount of resources that go into traveling. So if you just think about the cost of hotels and the cost of your flights and booking convention centers for meetings, some of those costs are reduced by using technologies like this. If we take it a step further to an even less available resource, people's time. So many of us are very well familiar with traveling to a meeting that takes an hour, but we've spent days traveling to it, or we'll actually take away days from our schedule for just that 1 hour meeting. And then if you take it even one step further, we are no longer limited to the worlds that we have physically, right? So we are able to create these virtual worlds that maybe don't even exist in real life, or we're hoping to get to one day. And I think it takes baby steps. So today, like I mentioned in my introduction, I'm really interested in exploring how do we make work fun again, or how do we at least make it something that resonates with us rather than it just being meeting after meeting that we think can be emails.
I just want to echo one thing that Ashita said, which I think is really important, is we ultimately need to know what problem we're trying to solve. And knowing what problem we're trying to solve really helps us identify the right type of technologies across the wide spectrum of emerging tech to use to solve a specific problem. As I mentioned, the space that I'm most focused in is the really broad space of artificial intelligence, which is almost like 10 different emerging techs all in its own, because there are so many different sub technologies that ultimately form what we refer to as AI. In popular discourse, I would say AI has almost a mythic type of a connotation where it seems quite magical. It's really not, it's math, but ultimately it boils down to a few things. So there's natural language processing, which is working with unstructured data like text to try and understand what text means, how the text is being used, understand that text, and potentially even generate that text. So natural language processing, generation, and understanding all kind of falls within that spectrum. You have signal processing, which might include audio modeling, trying to understand what people are saying. It might include working with sensor data. We do a lot of traditional deep learning, which is built, and machine learning, building models off of sometimes structured data, even looking at things like imagery. So there's a really wide variety of things that fall under this umbrella of AI. And it's of the emerging techs, probably one of the most established ones, or one of the more established ones, in the sense that there are entire businesses that we've already seen who have proved the value of these technologies. You can use it for hiring a car to drive you from point A to point B. There are companies that are using AI to service or to serve you different product recommendations, to recommend movies for you. So we're all interfacing with AI on a daily basis. We look after the advancement of these different types of technologies and the new ways in which they could solve problems, but also thinking back to, again, what's the right way to solve this? Part of that is thinking about how to take AI machine learning models out of a proof of concept stage and actually put them into a deployed environment, into a production system, which is not as easy as it seems. Our world isn't static. It's constantly changing. The data that feeds models is constantly changing. So having the infrastructure to support that, having the practices from a governance standpoint to oversee how these models are making decisions, this is kind of where some of the responsible AI comes in. Also, just thinking about the ethics of different systems. Should we even build this? Will it benefit us in the long run? What are the potential harms? Those are the types of areas that we've been increasingly focused on. But there's also another space where we're looking at how AI can be used to enable strategy. And so that's a little bit different. It's more of a simulation context. Can we build a computer representation of a real world system or a system that doesn't exist yet so that we can test different strategies and scenarios against that simulated world and come up ultimately with a much more resilient or robust outcome? One recent project that we did in this space, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because of the autonomous vehicles, Antoinette, that you mentioned earlier. We were working with an auto manufacturer that was looking to deploy a ride-sharing service that ultimately would be served with autonomous vehicles. And there is nothing like this yet on the market. No one has an entire business model that's completely sustained by autonomous vehicles supplying ride-sharing services. And especially at the time when we were doing this, there were really very few analogous systems to pull from. So we built several models of the vehicles themselves, a model of the city, models of consumers and their behaviors and why they might choose certain services over others, which might include how long you're willing to wait for a car and the novelty of driving in a self-driving car versus how that might decay over time. And so having this little simulated world helps us address a wide set of questions like, where do I place charging stations? These are critical infrastructure. How do I optimize that? What are some of the drivers around consumer demand, like wait time, and how does that influence how many vehicles we need? How many vehicles do we need in order to serve this geography? What are some of the other dynamics around how you link trips or how you might reposition cars? So a really wide range of questions we can start to at least attempt to address by building these types of representative systems. So lots of really cool work happening in the AI space right now.
Ladies, I just heard you mention multiple technologies that you guys are all working with. All of those technologies, plus hundreds more, are being tracked through our Immersion Tech Radar platform, which is used to identify which emerging technologies should be considered as enablers for different industries and clients. The essential 8 technologies are the ones that are having the biggest impact on business now and are fundamentally changing the way companies do business. IoT is being used remotely to monitor machines. Andrea, you mentioned earlier that VR is being used to change the way we are doing training. And Alana, you mentioned artificial intelligence is helping to automate complex decision making and much more. We are now focusing a lot of our attention on what happens when these technologies converge. And we're going to put up a slide that has the 6 convergence themes that we are focusing our attention on now. Ashita, how do you see these technologies coming together to offer value? Why are they important?
Thank you for the question, Antoinette. And I think it's a really interesting question because the technologies that you chose are themselves examples of convergence. Not only that, they are now part of our Essential 8 technology tool set, but they're coming together to make their impact even more impactful than if they were just used in and of themselves. So let's take the example of a technology called mixed reality. And Andrea laid out a really interesting spectrum earlier on that ranged from augmented reality all the way through virtual reality, so the extended reality spectrum. In the middle, there's a technology called mixed reality. And if you think you're unfamiliar with this technology, I promise you, you are not. Mixed reality is an anchored overlay of data in the real world. So if you've ever used an app to center the couch in the perfect spot in your living room, or you've used an app to have a dog tongue come out of your mouth and dog ears on your head, you have used this technology. I think MR is so interesting because it's a convergence of a lot of different types of technology. So, for example, it uses image recognition, which is a type of artificial intelligence, to really understand what you're seeing in your view. It uses IoT to connect the data from your phone over to the cloud to then feed that data back into what you're seeing in front of you. And augmented reality, which is really just what you're seeing on your phone itself. Not to mention, it's using something that we all all have, and as an emerged technology, your phone, to bring all of that together. So as you can see, we are well on our way to this digital first society, and I suspect that we're actually already there. We're intimately connected and familiar with these converging technologies, whether we know them by name or not. And I think it's really important because it's starting to make our world not only easier to navigate and to understand, but it's actually making our world a more accessible place for everybody. And I'm really excited that we've come to this path in technology where we're making technology accessible to everybody, because I think it just only helps us become a better culture altogether.
Thanks, Ashita. Andrea, I'll pose that same question to you. Why do you think that convergence themes are important?
Yeah, so I see the themes coming up in the day-to-day work that I do with VR and AR. For instance, a couple years ago, we did the largest deployment to date of virtual reality in an organization to be studied by that organization to understand its impact, and shared those results externally in a paper that we published. So we were looking specifically at how virtual reality affects learning compared to the exact same curriculum deployed in a classroom or online. How does learning it in virtual reality simulation change things for the learner? And we found that it makes people more emotionally connected to the content, that they're able to learn faster with less distraction. And in the course of running that study, we did another case study on how was our population responding to the technology to begin with. Just like putting a headset on, how was that for people? And this brings up the convergence theme, I think, of immersive interfaces, because you're covering someone's eyes, and there are technologies that the headset has in place, like a microphone, so that we can use natural language processing and ask the learner to speak and have that be the way that they interface with the technology. So in the simulation, they're talking to other people. And so instead of like pointing and clicking with a mouse to select, what would you choose of these options, the person is speaking what they would say in that situation, and the system is detecting it. So they're also able to use something in VR called gaze, which means there's head tracking sensors to say, where are you looking? So these much more natural human ways of signaling, using our voice, using our eyes, can now be utilized by the technology to improve the user experience. Another convergence theme that I see coming into play to change the way that we use VR is hyper-connected networks. So hyper-connected networks, which I know is your area of specialization, Antoinette, but 5G really is changing things when we think about how the content can be streamed and processed by the hardware, so that the experience around you feels more high definition, more realistic. It definitely improves the overall experience for the user and makes the technology a lot more viable in a business setting, something that's going to make people feel dizzy or, it's a choppy experience. Nobody wants to do that. So it was fun to check in with our learner population and do assessments around how do they like using the tech, and to see that these convergence themes, when applied to the technology we're using, really move the needle in a big way by improving that user experience.
So Ishita, earlier you mentioned technology being more accessible to everyone. And as technology gets more accessible to everyone, we're hoping that that technology will impact our lives in a positive manner. But no matter how good intentions are, there will always be some drawbacks. Alana, as PwC's responsible AI lead, how can we prevent technology misuse?
Antoinette, that is a fantastic question. I think what really at the root of what you're asking is, how do we make sure that the technologies that we're driving to build, that we're driving to adopt, are going to ultimately benefit us in a positive manner continuously going forward. Technology misuse is a very real concern. There are others. There's technology underuse and technology overuse. There's, just generally not using technology in the right way. Dr. Luciano Floridi, usually he's a philosopher at the Oxford Internet Institute. He typically uses those three frames. And so ultimately what we're thinking about is, how do we control, or how do we institute governance around systems such that we're building things the right way? We're using things the right way. And as consumers, we have the option and the opportunity to contribute back to the technology and influence how we want it to actually influence our lives. So a lot of different factors there. And there's no good answer or easy answer, I should say, to all of this. The first one is, I think, goes back to something Ishita brought up and I was trying to reiterate earlier, which is make sure that you're solving for the right problem, that you actually know what problem you're trying to solve, and that the technology that we're selecting will solve that problem in the right way or the best way. Oftentimes, we sometimes advocate for using emerging tech because it's really cool or because it's really fancy, and people will come in and they say, hey, I want AI, or I want this, or I want that. But it's not always right to drive with the technology solution first. We want to make sure we understand what the problem is. So getting a handle around the problem that we're ultimately trying to solve is a big thing. But it also comes down to education. People don't know what they don't know. If you don't tell them or help them understand some of the risks or some of the concerns that they may see, just think about some of the conversations we've been having as a society over the last year and a half around racial bias and racial inequity and gender inequity in technology. This is a conversation that has become much more public over the last 2 years because of consumer pushback, because of pushback from advocates, because of pushback from academics on how they see technology potentially influencing or impacting different populations in different ways. So that type of an advocacy lens is really important for us to sustain. Ultimately, this type of an advocacy then might translate into something like standards or soft law, where different institutions or industries might self-govern or institute policies that are adopted as a whole, and potentially ultimately regulation, like what we're seeing around AI being proposed in Europe, out of Europe, with the EU regulatory framework around AI. So all of these things are important, but it comes from understanding what we're trying to do and really education. Do we have a good understanding of what we're doing, of the impact that technology might have on us, and do we have opportunities to influence that technology going forward?
I think when we talk about misusing technology, we're essentially asking the question, how do we create trust in technology? And Ilana is like a superhero in helping protect us against bad agents that are trying to take advantage of people through technology, which is a very real concern that all of society has today. But I think that part of trusting technology is also preventing functional misuse of technology. And Ilana alluded to this a little bit earlier. If we always take technologies like VR for their cool factor, rather than focusing on the business problem that they're really trying to solve, we're likely misusing the technology and effectively reducing the trust in technology and delivering the real impact and results in the manner that they're intending to deliver. I spend a lot of my time actually saying no to use cases that don't make sense in VR and actually will do just as well in the 2D world. And on the flip side, some of our most beloved use cases and most inspiring sessions that we've had have been ones that have capitalized on the unique benefits of VR. It's the reason that we've been able to validate collaborative reality as a real collaboration tool in business within just the past year, which is insane. Collaborative reality has been around for a long time. And as I mentioned, the pandemic kind of gave it the opportunity to become a forefront technology that we'll be using. And I truly believe it will be part of our collaborative tool set as we move into the future of work. So I think staying true to the core functionality of technology is a key factor in helping gain that trust and effectively avoiding the misuse that you were talking about.
Well, as you know, we have a very hands-on approach in the lab. And so I think part of our show, don't tell approach goes a really long way. If you want somebody to develop trust in a technology like extended reality, they need to see for themselves that that it works, and that it's ready to take on a business problem and provide a viable solution. And you can spend, hours just talking about it, trying to hype it up. I wish we could send everybody in attendance to this event today a headset so you could put it on and try it out for yourself and see what kind of impact it has on you. But that's the approach we take to help people develop trust in a new tech that maybe they're hearing about, and they want to know, is this hype or is this reality? So we're able to do studies and things that help validate that there really is a there, but the fastest way to communicate that message, it isn't hand them the study, it's put them in the headset.
I just want to echo one thing that I think both Andrea and Nishita are also referring to, which is increasingly advocating for something that might be referred to as society in the loop programming, meaning taking the end users or the impacted parties of whatever technology or system that you're building and making sure that they and their opinions and their perspectives are more included in the development of technology itself. You'll get a more trusted solution at the outcome. You'll also be much more aware of some of the unintended harms and you'll be much more ready and able to mitigate some of those harms when you know them a priori.
Yeah, that human-centered design piece is so important. Like that's a huge part of the prototypes that we're trying to build. And also when we do our user experience testing, we want a diverse range of voices giving feedback on the experience, because when we have a more inclusive design, it's going to be a better product and people will trust it more and know that it's ready to deploy and utilize.
Exciting. So what I'm hearing is that in order to build trust, we need to know what we're actually solving for. We should include the end user so that we're able to get that feedback to see how they're feeling about the technology. Did I miss any points?
Yeah, we need to show it, not just talk about it. Like we've got to give people demonstrations, let them be immersed in it and give them visibility, whether it's an AI tool, opening it up so it's not so much as a black box. I know Alana's done work around how do we visualize what's going on in some artificial intelligence systems, so people are more educated about that when they're using it, but being able to make it more accessible to people who don't understand what it is or how it's working by giving them hands-on experience, I think is key.
And part of that is it boils down to governance, having controls around the development process and the deployment process of any particular technology, making sure that as part of that governance process, you're capturing the business requirements, the functional requirements, that you know what problem you're trying to solve. Someone is responsible for QAing this thing, whatever it is, before it goes live. There's some type of a monitoring so you can take feedback from in the extended reality space, how users are actually engaging or interacting with that technology. Or on the AI side, it could be how performance might be changing over time because things are changing in the world, and making sure that feeds back into the system itself so that you ultimately still have reliable technology. That reliability is key for that trust in the long run.
I also think having a global mindset is important. So there's a term that I really love. It's called the next billion users. And I think living where we do, often we start to think about technology in a microcosm of the society that we're already in. But there's a whole world out there, and the next billion users are just getting access to technologies that we've had for decades at this point. So how do we design technology so that everybody that is part of this planet is able to make the best use of those technologies and actually get real impact in their lives, just the way that we have over the past decade? So I think it's really important that when you make technology more accessible for a group of people, you're actually making that technology much easier to use for everybody. And I think that's how you make progress. And it's an area that I'm really interested in helping to advance.
The Convergence themes coming together has me most excited about being able to sit in a vehicle and that vehicle drive for me. What are you guys most excited about for the future of these technologies?
Well, Antoinette, I am also eagerly awaiting the self-driving car future, but I would say I'm actually most inspired by the recent, and I'll kind of what Ashita brought this up, which is the point around accessibility. I've really been so excited to see our technologies moving from a space where only very few can access them to a space where many more can not only access those technologies but are empowered to contribute to that technology and to its future development. So it's not a specific technology I'm excited for. I just more think that having a means to leverage technology to enable a more equitable future is going to be really cool.
I think similarly to Lana, it's not one specific technology, but I mentioned earlier that I'm really interested in the intersection of design and behavior and how technology helps in expanding those horizons. And I think that really is the area that I'm most excited for. And I can give you an example of how powerful this can be. So just a decade ago, if you wanted to check the weather, you had to open your laptop, you had to log in, you had to open Internet Explorer or Chrome or whatever. You had to go to a weather website, put in your zip code, and then you would maybe hopefully know what the weather was going to be. Today, you just ask your phone and it tells you right away what the weather is going to be that day or for the weekend or whatever you want. And we're literally interfacing with technology as if it was a person. And it's not even something that we notice anymore because it is so seamlessly integrated into our everyday lives. And I think that is the power of this intersection of design and behavior and technology. So I'm just really excited to see how more and more of these technologies and convergence themes become so seamlessly integrated that we don't even notice that it's there. I think they say that great design is one that you don't notice. And I'm really hopeful on what that's going to look like.
I think there's so much to be excited about when we're thinking about environmental benefits of using emerging technologies. Ashita touched on like being able to reduce travel by holding these meetings in virtual reality. So we get that sense of presence of being there without having to hop on an airplane and reserve a hotel. And so I think there's so many. I mean, there's also I know that there's the growing use case of doing like toxic waste cleanup with a robot that's guided by someone wearing, a virtual reality headset. So it looks like they're there and they can see how to clean up the waste. So I think there's huge environmental impacts with technology. I think societal impacts. I talked a little bit about the diversity and inclusion training as part of that study that we launched. The training that we were able to put our own people through was called Inclusion and Belonging at PwC, and we were able to practice scenarios where potentially unconscious bias tends to creep in deciding who we hire, who we staff on projects, and who we give recognition for the work that we do. So being able to use this technology to gain greater awareness of what some of our potentially unconscious bias might be, helps us create a more inclusive community and see how we can advocate for each other. And we're already seeing the adoption of technology for this use case growing and growing.
So I want to thank my three panelists, Andrea, Ashita, and Alana, for joining me here today, talking about keeping up with emerging and advanced technologies. And thank you all for joining us.